Hi, everyone. My name is David Bahar. Let me turn off my background. Give me 1 second. Much better. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is David Bahar. Thank you so much for the introduction, Jan. This plenary session is called Next Generation Relay. I'm very excited about this topic and having this discussion with you. Next slide, please. So first, I want to open by asking the important question: why do relay services exist? I'm a historian, so I know and believe in understanding why. That helps us find solutions in the future. The deaf community and their needs vary greatly, but the phone is limited to only those who can hear or speak, and for those who can use the phone. A.G. Bell, Alexander Graham Bell, tried to develop a communication aid for his wife who happened to be deaf, and that invention became the telephone and opened a new world for communication for generations to come. Next slide. On the screen, we are showing a picture of an antique, a very old telephone. And that phone was the revolution in communication. It overtook communication in that age and time. More than 100 years in the making, or after we still have the telephone. So we have one big problem though. It relies on sound and someone to be able to voice. Those who are hard of hearing, deaf, or speech disabled aren't able to access that technology. As long as the phone can only use and be used by those who can hear and speak, that technology leaves many people behind, and it has for generations. Next slide, please. The ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was not signed till much later, a century later after the phone was invented, which is a very long time. Generations of deaf people grew up without being able to use the phone. Instead of the phone and being able to hear and speak, they relied on the kindness of strangers, friends, family, and neighbors to help make phone calls. They would write a list of their needs and ask them, hey, would you mind making this call for me? And they lost their autonomy. And for generations, grandparents before us, parents and grandparents before us, and before the invention, didn't feel as unequal, but now, after the phone, they did. They had a sense of hearing, sight. We do have 5 different senses: hearing, sight, touch, and so forth. But the phone relies on just one sense. And to get around that isn't easy. Next slide, please. So we have 2 pictures on this screen. And let me describe those pictures. The first one is a technology that was allowed or created for teletype writing, a teletypewriter that was first used by the military, rail operators, and news to provide information at a distance. At that time, it wasn't used for relay services, but they were considered today that there was a technology back in the 30s that could handle that. But there was a missing link: how to have that technology connect with telecommunication devices. So we came up with a coupler. which you see on the picture on the right in the center. There's a man wearing a button-up white and gray striped shirt. And many of you know in the middle of the picture, there's a coupler next to a typewriter. And there is also a lamp. The coupler is a small box that the headset rests on. That was the magic link that made it possible to use the home phone line to be able to communicate for the deaf community. Isn't technology amazing? Next slide, please. Now, as TTY spread throughout the community, which actually happened pretty slowly, that led to the creation of volunteer relay services. Technology made relay services possible. A few states at that time set up relay services. They would train caller assistants, operators, to relay information through the TTY. They would listen to the hearing person and type back and forth with the deaf person. And they would use their sense of hearing and speech to facilitate communication. And that was quite a leap in creating autonomy for the deaf community. And that was before the ADA in the 80s passed. And not a large amount of deaf people had a TTY in their home. But the policy, the ADA, once it was signed, led to open doors for the community. And we really wanted to establish a nationwide TTY relay service. 365 days, 7 days a week. And the ADA allowed that. And the idea, the concept of functional equivalence, which is an equal playing field that needs, and the pillars needed to support the community was that service. To be able to make a call anytime, that was functional equivalence. So relay services, actually, so if you're using relay service, if there's a problem with the phone, and you don't have to rely on other people to help make those calls, you become independent and autonomous. That autonomy is great, but it's not complete. Because how do you make that call if you don't have parity? There was still a gap in equity. Let me give you an example. Those who use relay and another person who doesn't use relay wants to call that person who does use relay, they will need to call relay person first, connect with them, and then that relay caller will connect with the other person, which takes up a lot of time. Usually there's a peer-to-peer connection with a hearing-to-hearing person. But with relay, you didn't do that. You have to connect with the relay person first, and you have a third party in your communication. So it didn't provide an equitable experience through the phone as hearing people had. Once VRS was established, we had the same issue. You didn't have parity because VRS, as it was a new technology, it's a great and wonderful service. You needed this wonderful, amazing thing called the internet. VRS back in the day was not a pretty sight. If you remember that experience and what it looks like, let me see if I can show you. Next slide, please. So for those who hadn't they hadn't had the unique pleasure of experiencing VRS back in the old days, you had a video phone, and when someone would call you, at that time, the video phone didn't have a phone number. There was nothing attached to it like that. They had an IP address associated with it. So if I needed to call somebody, that person must have a video phone, and I would have to ask what their IP address was. And that's how we would call each other. So we used our IP addresses for phone numbers, which was not great. The problem with the IP address is it's always different. Instead of having one phone number, the IP address every time you connected would change. And it was quite a mess. If you think about that as a hearing person making a phone call and wanting to call that person, you connecting with them, it's easy to call their phone number. But if they had a phone number that was different every time, it wouldn't work. So that's where we get to unequal access. So you would have a problem when calling a relay person. You might have several different numbers or IP addresses that you would have to use. So for work phone or mobile phone, you can call anybody. Like nowadays through Zoom, I can call in and it's the same number. I can text somebody and it's the same number. Now we are all in the same playing field. But me, when I was using relay service, it depended on the individual. I had a video phone in my office and a laptop set up at home. So, and a BlackBerry. So again, no parity there. If my email signature included all of the phone numbers, it would be a dictionary. Next slide, please.
That is no equality for dialing. And it has been a negative experience for those who use that emergency services. I mean, 911 has no way of giving a call back through relay in those times. And if there was a video phone making calls back and forth, we had to connect out into a North American number plan, which had an address which would connect to 911, but that's not where I would be. The video phone number did not link to where I was. There was no phone number and information documented with my 911 information. So when you're calling, 911 had no idea where you might be calling from. Our solution was to establish a database. With that database, we will merge the phone number system information with the internet information. So there was a bridge. As an example, we would have a phone number, with its series of numbers, and that would belong to your video phone. That number then gets ported into the database, and it has your SIM card or your IP address for that video phone connected to it. That's all we did. It was very simple. It was very basic, bare bones functional. And it was heavily reliant, and it was reliable and made a huge impact. Finally, owners of VPs could make calls with a phone number, not an IP address. Because of that, having that phone number, we were able to connect it with a physical location. So that 911 experience improved greatly. That's where we can see policy leading to solutions, which has a great impact on the community. So I'm going to walk you through all these different parts of the issues about maybe not being able to hear or speak and the approach that we have had and how people have made and received phone calls. So I've done that. I would like to mention one more important part, which is like the future of relay services is relying on this thing that I will be sharing with you. The reason I want to flesh this out for you is because I feel like relay services, we want to have an equivalent experience, an equivalent dialing system. We need to have that. Without having this discussion, we can't have the control. In the past, in the time when Alexander Graham Bell was creating his company, I put a picture of a logo on the screen here. This was the first company to provide phone services for most of the 20th century, really. They had a monopoly. So they would be able to call each other, but if you were a user of a different company, you could not make phone calls between companies. This is where the idea of interoperability starts, that any phone call can be made between any company. That's what interoperability is. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now we're jumping to 1996. So the Bell Phone Company was split off for antitrust reasons. So there were 7 different now independent companies made from that one company. And it happened that there was the same problem. They still couldn't connect with the smaller phone companies. So Congress did take action, and the result was the Telecom Act of 1996, which requires interoperability with any different and all different carriers. The phone numbers could be passed between each company. If a person jumps from company to company, they would not lose their phone number. This was a big change. 1996 doesn't seem like that long ago. It seems like it was very recent in our history. But I mean, I was a senior in high school. I had an AOL email address. Another thing happened in 1996 was that the internet really took charge. Next slide. I can't create enough emphasis on how the internet has completely ingratiated itself into our everyday lives, how the internet has changed telecommunications. There's not enough words. I can't overstate the importance of that. At the beginning, when we had that plain phone to what we have now, it's a new frontier of telecommunications. And the companies and options that are out there for us are endless. I'm not sure if you remember the old days, but you can see on my screen on the left, I have a photo here. If anybody remembers this technology, this is the Windows Netming. And this is what came with Microsoft Windows back in the old days. It was a free video chat app. This was early 2000s. It was a very new technology at that time, and it was becoming more and more frequently used. This was kind of a new relay service. We would have this. And communication information started being transmitted more quickly. It was wonderful, yeah? Next slide. Technology that is available today is amazing. And there's so many choices, but we're still catching up. ADA was passed in 1991. We got relay. We got the Telecom Act in 96. And then interoperability for the phone network carriers. So if you wanted to save money and use a cheaper carrier, you didn't have to be concerned about not being able to call other companies. It made it very easy, and it took that worry off your plate. But soon we recognized that the old issues were still showing themselves, and we were still having the same negative issue as we had before. The baby bells, when those other companies trying to call outside companies, those issues were still coming up. Between internet, the rise of the internet, relay companies started competing for customers. So they would lock out their video systems. Again, we couldn't make calls between carriers. And again, policy needed to come into play to address those issues. So the FCC did institute a interoperability requirement so that the video relay system would be equivalent to what hearing people use, as in we could use any carrier that we wanted for our VRS services. Even today, with VRS, it lives in a bubble. We have a device and they have to work with each other, but they don't work with the larger devices out in the world. And we need to have a solution for this. Luckily, we believe that we have already found this solution. Next slide. So the issue that we have is not being able to make calls and receive calls with our video phone number is very important. The FCC did give their counsel to NANC, and they made recommendations on several things because they did study the problem about not being able to make these and receive calls with video phones with a phone number. So we did identify interoperability, the North American Numbering Council Interoperable Video Conferencing Work Group. So they did research on how to make interoperability for video phones possible using a 10-digit phone number. And it's my honor to co-chair the work of those groups for 2 terms. Matt Hurst from CTI was a co-chair for the first term, and then Chris W. from Comcast was a co-chair for my second term. Next. So that working group had discussions and thought about how to structure the phone system so that you were able to support more than just audio calls, adding other features like video phones, and other things, and having, we have to contribute and work into that. Intelligent people from technology, phone companies, internet industry, all came together to have this discussion and brainstorming ideas to figure out how to solve this problem. And the approach was to choose the same concept of the directory, having a phone number with location for video phone, that same concept that we have with the IPs and location that we had before. And having that, but we have the issue now about interoperability of services, delay, dialing equivalence, interoperability, all of those will be resolved by having this database. That database will support audio calls, video phones, texting, real-time text. I will touch on that more later. But real-time text is, we're already recognizing that as a feature that is replacing TTY. And it is important that the database makes it possible for VRS callers to directly call 911. That has not been possible and is not possible currently. Next slide. IVC governance is a working group that is standard, which has consent on how to move forward. First thing we bring up is, as many of you, I suspect, are wondering the same thing, is who is paying for this? And how are we paying for this? Interoperable video configuration, IVC. I mean, we've had discussions in the past, directly makes it possible for that database makes it possible for that 10-digit number to connect to a video phone. We're going to be using that model and looking at that for IVC, and also possibly in general for VRS providers to control the calls that are coming. We don't really want that. Hearing people make direct connections without that. And so our carriers will have to give up that control as well. regards to who is paying it and who is paying, traditionally it was the FCC who had a fund and had separate structure for paying for VRS services. IVC will also need a different system. We cannot borrow from that system that we have currently. People want a governance methodology. That GA is that anyone in any company who wants to can provide IVC accommodations for interoperability for phone conferencing. They can join that GA and they can contribute to the cost of operation for the whole GA. And members who join have to then make an agreement and voluntarily make this agreement to provide interoperability video. So anyone that has a product from one of these companies who was providing this IVC, we feel confident that they can make calls to any other platform or product using IVC. So that is the equivalent interoperability concept. Next. The second thing that IVC working group recommended was a distributed database, which means that all information is shared with the different members. We do that because each member who wants to connect to the GA will be setting up their own copy of this database, which really literally would be contributing to the operation of the database. The database then will include lots of bits of information about the phone number, like preferred apps for video calls, what kind of relay services you choose. All of that information will be used to navigate and route your call to the appropriate place behind the scenes without having to make all these separate connections yourself. Also, that will solve one of the largest challenges that has been recognized with relay experience, which is when a hearing person calls in, they figure out that they have connected to relay and they hang up. So receiving calls as a person who uses relay has been challenging. One of the things the FCC asked us to do for some homework was this, and they were very specific, and they asked us to look into how to reasonably use the database for 911 calls. And what we found is that when you make a call to 911, the experience is much improved with IVC. And the database will have all the information about the relay services, and the company will use that. You know, again, which app you prefer to use for default. And if a connection is made with 911, you will directly be working with 911. You don't have to go through relay first. The IVC then, the operator will be pulled in after the connection is made to 911. Another part of the dialing experience equivalence is if the phone has lots of different things. I can explain again, I have my laptop, my video phone, and my phone number as separate numbers. I can now have one number. I have my phone number. I can use it on an IVC database in my app. So I can text with the person. I can make video phone calls. I can call into a hearing person as well. That is an equivalent experience to what a hearing person goes through, having the one phone number. Technology really is changing very quickly. And we have lots of different devices that we couldn't even imagine a couple of years ago. Then we have them now. HD video, walking through your screen, relay on mobile, live interactive devices. Our recommendation for IVC is that we recognize the work of the people at NTD-RID and who are working on their projects, and people who are working on separate projects. Both are building and the groundwork for the governance communication. We've come a long way from the services we had run on the old-fashioned computer lines. And one more thing I wanted to mention before I close out here. RTC really is a text over IP. That's a real-time texting. And does set the standard for the international industry. And really, it's a modern version of TTY communications, honestly. It's the same as TTY. I mean, I would say it's not like TTY. I don't want to say that, but it doesn't work on just, it works on the internet. TTY did not, sorry, getting things mixed up in my head here. So yeah, modern texting is on the internet, and it is like an unlinked TTY. You can have the audio going at the same time, video going at the same time, data running at the same time. The FCC really has laid the groundwork for the future of communications based on RTT, what we had maybe 5 years ago, and how we allowed the wireless connection, because previously it didn't support TTY on Wi-Fi. Having RTT instead really released it for all. There's no way to put TTY on the Wi-Fi. So having that now, and that new requirement to support our real-time texting RTT, has made a lot of things possible for relay services into the future. Different modalities now can intermesh and intermingle in one call. We can have audio, we can have text, as an example, in one call. The old relay of VCO, IP addresses, all of that can now work together to support one technology moving into the future. RTT is very exciting. It gives us a glimpse into what the future of relay might look like that we are discussing in your great breakout groups, which will happen right after this session. The NG911 also supports RTT, which would mean RTT can be used for direct communication calls to 911, and also talking, texting, video with 911 simultaneously. Isn't technology wonderful? But technology isn't everything. For real functional equivalence, for mental health, for the communication system, it needs to be inclusive, which means everyone who uses the phone would be on equal footing. Technology does not create that. It is not enough. After all, the first VP that was in 1936 in Berlin, you can see that. It's on the center left image. That's what a video phone looked like 85 years ago. The picture on the right, this is a video phone that was developed later by Bell Labs in 1950s. Those two pictures there, one 85 years old, one 65 years old, really were a glimpse into our future. We just haven't had the policies to make it happen. Thank you so much. If you have a desire to learn more, please feel free to reach out to me, david.bahar@maryland.gov.